I want you to picture the stereotypical Caribbean vacation for a second. Just, close your eyes. What do you see?
Hmm. I'm guessing white sand, a hammock, maybe a waiter handing you a drink with a little umbrella in it.
Exactly. It's flat, it's sunny, and honestly, it's completely interchangeable. You can be in Punta Cana, you could be in Cancun, you could be in Montego Bay. It's the resort bubble.
Right. It's a space that's almost designed to have no history. It's just a backdrop for relaxation.
But then I started digging into this stack of research you sent over on Port Antonio, Jamaica,
Mm-hmm.
and I realized, wow, we are dealing with something that refuses to be just a backdrop. This isn't a postcard.
No.
The source material uses this very specific word to describe it. And I'll be honest, I had to look it up to get the full nuance. A palimpsest.
It's a fantastic word, isn't it? It comes from manuscript studies originally.
Yeah, so for everyone who hasn't been in a Latin class recently, historically, parchment was incredibly expensive. You couldn't just, crumble it up and throw it away if you made a mistake or needed to write something new.
Of course not.
So scribes would scrape the skin clean, they'd try to erase the old text and just write over it.
But, and this is the key part, the erasure was never perfect.
That's the kicker. The old ink leaves a trace. It sort of bleeds through. So you end up with a document where you have the new story right on top, but these ghostly, faint lines of the old story are still visible underneath.
And that is the perfect lens for Port Antonio. You might be standing on a beach that feels like a modern movie set, but if you look at the ground beneath your feet, you're seeing Spanish names, British military anxiety, maroon resistance,
Yeah.
and, 1950s Hollywood glamour, all occupying the exact same space.
It's a geography of ghosts. And that's our mission for this deep dive. We aren't just looking at the pretty scenery. We're going to try to read the parchment. We're going to peel back the layers of this place, starting from the rugged mountains of the 18th century.
Right.
Going through the banana boom that, and this really surprised me, actually invented the concept of modern tourism there. And then finally ending up in that celebrity era that everyone remembers.
And I think the most important thing to keep in mind as we go is that none of these layers are sealed off from each other. The Hollywood star in the 1950s is partying on a foundation laid by a banana captain in the 1870s, who was only there because the geography made it impossible for the British to control the interior in the 1700s.
Everything is connected. So let's start with the canvas itself, the geography. Because looking at the maps and the source material, Port Antonio looks nothing like the rest of Jamaica's tourist zones.
Yeah.
It's not flat. It's jagged.
It's often called the Emerald Frontier. And that's not just marketing fluff, it's a climatological reality. To understand the history here, you have to understand a phenomenon called orographic lift.
Okay, lay it on me. I saw the term in the notes, but what does it actually mean for someone standing on the ground?
So imagine the trade winds blowing in off the Atlantic. They're warm and they are absolutely loaded with moisture. They rush toward the island, but in Portland Parish, that's where Port Antonio is, they immediately smack into a wall.
The Blue Mountains and the John Crow Mountains.
Exactly. These are high, rugged peaks right on the coast. The wind hits them and has nowhere to go but up. As that air rises, it cools down really fast. And because it can't hold the moisture anymore, it just dumps it.
So it's not just rainy. It's a deluge.
It creates a very specific type of environment. You have these incredibly dense rainforests, and you have what hydrologists call flashy rivers. They can go from a trickle to a torrent in just a matter of hours.
Which sounds absolutely miserable if you're a British soldier in a wool coat in, say, 1730.
It was a nightmare for them. But for the Maroons, the Africans who had escaped enslavement, it was a fortress. And that brings us to the first faint layer on our palimpsest.
The Spanish layer.
And well, even before the Maroons, you have the name, Puerto Antonio. The British captured Jamaica in 1655, and they renamed almost everything to sound more English. But this name just stuck. It's a ghostly trace of the Spanish Empire that just wouldn't scrub off.
But the British layer is where the tension really spikes. The sources describes the British presence here not as a settlement, but as a siege mentality.
And you can see it in the architecture. If you go to the Titchfield Peninsula today, you find the ruins of Fort George. Now, usually a fort in the Caribbean is designed to stop, pirates or foreign navies. And Fort George had guns pointing out to sea, sure.
But I was looking at the schematics,
Yeah.
and the walls are 10 feet thick.
Yeah.
10 feet. That seems excessive if you're just worried about a stray ship.
It is excessive, unless you are terrified of what's behind you. The fort was designed to look inward. The British controlled the coast, but the interior, those rugged mountains we just talked about, that was the sovereign domain of the Windward Maroons.
This is a part of the history that I think often gets, well, It gets oversimplified. We hear escaped slaves, and we think of people hiding in caves. But the sources depict a highly organized strategic military society.
Absolutely. They weren't just hiding, they were holding territory. And on the windward side, they were led by Nanny.
Nanny of the Maroons.
Sounds
National hero?
a brilliant strategist. And to understand her impact, you just have to look at the timeline. The British were desperate to stop these wars. They signed a treaty with the Leeward Marines on the west side of the island in 1739. But Nanny, she didn't sign.
She left them on read.
She kept fighting. She held out for another full year, and when she finally agreed to a truce in 1740, she did it on her terms. She secured a land grant of 500 acres for her people. That became New Nannytown, which we know today as Moortown.
There was a really interesting inclusion in our reading list, a historical fiction novel called The Secret Pact by Glenn Carty. Now, I usually skip the fiction when we do these deep dives because I want the hard facts, but this one, it actually helped me visualize the atmosphere.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, history books give you dates. Treaty signed 1740, but the novel captures the tension. It describes the silence of the ferns, the humidity, that feeling of being watched by eyes you can't see. It wasn't just documents being signed. It was this visceral, fragile peace in a jungle that could kill you.
And that atmosphere is precisely why this area is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's a mixed site, which is pretty rare globally.
Right.
It acknowledges the biodiversity like the giant swallowtail butterfly, but it also acknowledges that the mountains themselves are a monument to that resistance.
So that's layer one. A landscape of resistance, rain, and thick stone walls looking inward. Now we jump forward. We scrape the parchment again. It's 1870. The wars are over. The British Empire is shifting gears. And we go from guerrilla warfare to bananas.
The era of green gold.
This is where the story gets really weird for me. We have this character, Captain Lorenzo Del Baker. He sounds like someone out of a Melville novel.
He was a Cape Cod fisherman, essentially.
He sails in on a schooner called the Telegraph. He's not looking for gold or conquest. He picks up some bananas in Port Antonio, sails them back to New Jersey, and realizes he has made a massive profit.
It's the aha moment that changed the entire global fruit economy. Before this, bananas were a rare, exotic curiosity in the U.S. Baker realized that if he could just get the logistics right, he could make them a staple.
And this kicks off what the sources call the Golden Age, running from 1870 to about 1959. But what struck me reading through the notes is that this wasn't just about farming. It was a full-on industrial revolution for the town.
It had to be. Bananas are heavy, they bruise easily, and they rot fast. To move millions of stems, you need serious infrastructure. That's why you see the railway extension arriving in 1896. They built these massive iron bridges over the Rio Grande, not for passengers at first, but for fruit.
And the town itself starts to look different. You get the courthouse in 1895, the Folly Point Lighthouse. Port Antonio wasn't a military outpost anymore. It was the banana capital of the world.
But here is the connection that I think is the most fascinating part of this whole deep dive. We usually think of industry and tourism as separate worlds. You know, the factory is over here and the resort is over there.
Right. You don't vacation in a shipping yard.
But in Port Antonio, the banana trade literally invented tourism.
It's the banana boat model.
Exactly. The United Fruit Company, the giant corporation that grew out of Baker's business, had a logistics problem. They had these steamships running north with bananas, but they were coming back south empty.
Burning coal, paying crews, just hauling nothing but air.
So someone had this brilliant idea. Why not sell tickets to affluent Americans escaping the winter? They marketed it as an adventure.
The sources quote a slogan, "Comfort above deck, freight protection below deck," which is, well, it's honest at least.
It's incredibly efficient. There's a record of a 1904 voyage from Philadelphia to Port Antonio that perfectly illustrates this. You have the same ship carrying the green gold north, turning around and carrying wealthy tourists south.
But once they got there, where did they stay? I mean, you can't put a Victorian lady in a warehouse on the wharf.
Enter the Titchfield Hotel. And this wasn't just a hotel, it was a psychological tool.
What do you mean by that?
Well, remember the context. For a Victorian traveler, the tropics were scary. They were seen as disease-ridden, oppressively hot, dangerous places. So the United Fruit Company built the Titchfield to be an architecture of reassurance.
Okay, get it.
They built it up on the hill, massive verandas, high ceilings for ventilation. It was designed to tell these tourists, you're safe here, you're civilized here. This is just like home, but warmer.
It was a bubble.
A bubble built directly on top of the logistics of the fruit trade.
So you have these tourists sipping tea on the veranda, looking out at the beautiful harbor.
Yeah.
But if we peel back the layer again, let's call this layer 3, we have to ask the uncomfortable question. The era is called green gold. But was it golden for everyone?
And the answer, unsurprisingly, is no. This is the reality check layer.
I was looking at the archival photos included in the source folder. You see these lines of banana carriers moving in tandem toward the boats, women carrying massive bunches on their heads, men running up gangplanks. It doesn't look like a golden age. It looks like grueling physical labor.
It was incredibly intense, and there's an agricultural context here that's important. As these big plantations expanded, they needed land, the best land. So the green gold rush often pushed Afro-Jamaican smallholders off the prime soil. They were forced to lease land or move to higher elevations that weren't as good for growing.
So while the town was getting lighthouses and courthouses, there was this deep social stratification happening. The wealth was being extracted, literally and figuratively.
Right. And beyond the social costs, there was a huge structural risk. They were building an entire economy on monoculture, one crop.
Which is basically gambling with your entire GDP.
It is. And Port Antonio lost that gamble repeatedly. The history is just punctuated by these shocks. You had a massive hurricane in 1903 that wiped out the town and bankrupted independent growers.
Then another in 1944, Hurricane Charlie in 1951.
And it wasn't just wind, it was biology. Panama disease, this fungal wilt, started tearing through the plantations in the early 20th century. So by the time we get to the 1940s and 50s, the economic engine of the banana trade is already sputtering. The machine is breaking down.
Which is so ironic, because that brings us to layer 4. The era that everyone thinks is the peak of Port Antonio. The celebrity era.
The Errol Flynn years.
This is the stuff of legend. Flynn, the Hollywood swashbuckler, sails in. He buys Navy Island. He's hosting Bette Davis, David Niven, keeping a crocodile as a pet. I mean, it sounds like the town is booming.
But if you look at the economic data, this era is actually what we call an afterimage.
An afterimage, like when you stare at a light too long.
Exactly. Think about when a flashbulb goes off in your face. You still see that bright spot for a few seconds, even though the light source is dead. The structural economy, the bananas, the shipping was already collapsing. The celebrity glamour was just a veneer over a town that was in deep, deep trouble.
That is a fascinating way to put it. We get distracted by the stars, but the foundation was rotting away.
Precisely. And this era is full of myths that try to cover that up. There's the famous story that Errol Flynn won Navy Island in a poker game.
I've heard that one. It's in practically every guidebook I've ever seen on Jamaica.
It's a great story. It fits the brand perfectly, the rogue, the gambler. But our sources are very careful to point out that this is local folklore. There's no property deed that says transfer by royal flush, but the myth itself became the product.
Culturally, though, this era did give us something tangible, right? The Jolly Boys.
Yes, the Mento tradition. These bands were hired to play at Flynn's parties. It's a complex dynamic because, on one hand, they were packaging local culture for elite entertainment, it was performative, but on the other hand, that patronage helped Mento music survive when other styles might have faded out.
It's that palimpsest again, the Hollywood layer interacting with the local culture layer.
Exactly.
So we've stripped back the layers: Spanish ghosts, maroon resistance, banana logistics, and the Hollywood myth. Now let's bring it to the present, layer 5. What is Port Antonio today?
Today, it markets itself as the anti-all-inclusive. It's low-density, nature-forward.
But the cool thing is, if you visit the attractions today, you are just touring repurposed pieces of those previous layers.
Right.
Take the Rio Grande, for instance.
Right. People go there now for bamboo rafting. It's romantic, it's quiet, you have a guide pulling you down the river. But why bamboo rafts?
I'm guessing it wasn't originally for romance.
Definitely not. That is how they got the bananas down from the mountains to the ships. The roads were terrible, so the river was the highway. When you sit on a bamboo raft today, you are literally floating on a piece of old agricultural logistics.
And the Blue Lagoon, or Reach Falls?
Reach Falls is famous because of the movie Cocktail with Tom Cruise. Again, the Hollywood connection. The layers are still active.
But I think the most significant part of the modern layer goes right back to the Maroons.
Yes, this is crucial. In 2008, Moortown's heritage was designated as UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage. And that word intangible is key.
Meaning it's not a building you can touch or a fort you can walk through?
Right. It's the chromanti play, the music, the dance, the drumming, the herbal medicine. It's a culture that is still being lived. It's a continuous line stretching all the way back to Nanny in the 1700s.
So if one of our listeners is actually planning a trip to Port Antonio, or really anywhere with this kind of depth. How should this deep dive change what they do?
I think the advice is to be a learner, not just a tourist. Don't just look at the scenery. Engage with community-led guides, especially when it comes to the maroon heritage. That history is fragile, and it deserves respect.
It really changes how you see the place. It's not just a beach town, it's a palimpsest.
It makes you realize that travel isn't just about the view in front of you. It raises a question I try to ask myself whenever I go somewhere new. When I look at a beautiful landscape, am I just seeing the sunset? Or can I train myself to see the ghostly traces of the labor and the history that made it accessible?
That golden age wasn't just built on gold. It was built on the backs of banana carriers, just as much as it was on the wealth of the travelers.
And those traces are still there, if you know how to look.
Definitely something to chew on next time you're scrolling through travel deals. Thanks for peeling back the layers with us today.
Always a pleasure.
See you on the next Deep Dive.